Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this episode for Next Frontier in Insights. My name is Yogesh Chavda. I'm the founder of Y2S Consulting and a lecturer here at the University of South Carolina. Today, I am so fortunate to have Priti Mehra here, who's joining us all the way from the West Coast to talk about a really important topic, which is how do you scale businesses? We'll get into all those details in a second. But before we go too far, Priti, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So, Preeti, before we start, getting into the actual content, why don't we just do a quick background on you, as to tell us who you are, give us a little bit of background in terms of your career progression,
Mhm.
and we obviously met at a conference a few months ago,
Yes.
and that's kind of like how we got here today. But
Yes.
it would be great for everybody to know who you are, basically. So, why don't you start with that first?
Yes. Well, it was yes. The conference isn't. Since then we started talking about so many interesting things. In
Yeah.
terms of my career journey, I started in India and stumbled into insights. Spent a few years there and decided it's something that I realized. I mean, I think initially it was always about people stumbling into insights rather than actually choosing it as a career. And I was one of those. And then after a few years, I was like, no, this is really what I want.
Right.
But I wanted a lot of experimentation built into my insights career. So that took me across continents. So I've lived and worked in 3 continents, multiple countries, and moved from India to the US, took a bit of a break, but was also working in an academic environment. From there, I then joined the University of Georgia, the Masters in Marketing Research program. Decided I wanted a little bit of more sort of an academic rigor to insights. Um, Finished my master's, an opportunity opened up in South Africa. And I was like, fantastic. I haven't loved, but I'm fascinated about this, working there. So I picked up my bags and relocated from Atlanta to Johannesburg.
Wow.
Spent the next 4 years there with Millwall Brown, South Africa. And it was, again, an interesting time. It was a new acquisition. The business, the market was booming. There was just so much creativity and just an appreciation for insights. I was lucky to spend 4 years in that environment. And did some really interesting work at that point for Unilever. I was heading up the Africa, Middle East sort of, no, it was, I can't remember, but it was the wider region. So it was, I think,
Mm.
EMEA and some part of some other geographies. Um, Great work with, financial services, insurance. After 4 years, I was like, great, done this, another point. And that's when I moved to Singapore. Set up again, it was with Millward Brown and then subsequently Kantar. I set up the sort of the centers of excellence for media and data transformation,
Hmm.
um, and also sort of trying to kind of scale up and establish consistent ways of working across the multiple markets in Asia Pacific at that point.
Hmm.
Um, Stayed there for 6 years, became managing director of the Singapore business, did a lot of work in Asia Pacific, and then there was an opportunity in San Francisco. So 7 years ago, I moved to the Bay Area, joined Kantar here, and a lot of focus at this point in my career started in terms of working with tech, ad tech, fintech, really trying to sort of understand the transformation that was happening in terms in media measurement. So again, it was another sort of change in my career trajectory. And then I had an opportunity sort of to join Google. Google was my client. They were doing a lot of work in the area of brand transformation, brand measurement and transformation, as well as reputation. And spent the next 4 years at Google, which was, again,
Hmm.
fascinating to, move from the agency side to the client, and the client like Google with all of the complexities and innovation and everything else that comes with it. Um, and then as of last year, I decided to kind of step back and start to think about what I want to do next. And for the
Hmm.
past 6 months or so, I've been more of an independent consultant, focusing on strategy, go to market, AI implementation,
Hmm.
working with a couple of startups. So um, lots of changes, lots of movements, lots of pivots. That's kind of my career trajectory.
It's amazing, and the fact that you have a wealth of experience, working in developing markets as well as mature markets, working across so many different kinds of companies, especially when you were on the Kantar side and the Millward Brown side,
Mm-hmm.
and then working also at Google on the client side. You've got that background of
Yeah.
seeing, knowing, and doing, lots of things that have led, that have propelled your career over the years, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly why when I heard your story, the first time, I was thinking like, you've got something to share for a lot of people, simply because the when you're especially working in the developing markets, you are constantly scaling, right? So there's an experience factor there. Coming into the North America and then scaling over here, you've got those, you understand those nuanced differences basically. So that's the reason why I wanted you here. So let's get it right into the conversation. So tell me, you said at the very end of your point that, hey, you've been getting into the AI space and all that stuff. So tell me exactly, what are you doing in that space first and foremost?
So a lot of what I'm thinking of at the moment is, I've had so many conversations in the last 6 months, and everything starts with the position of what is AI going to replace? And
Mm-hmm,
to me, it is more of coming from, okay, do we need to reskill? Do we need to think of a replacement strategy? Do we need to kind of rethink how we work?
mm-hmm,
And also, if I could almost say this, it comes from a position of fear,
mm-hmm,
and uncertainty. And my focus has been on thinking about thinking of AI as a partner,
mm-hmm,
how to have almost of a transformation playbook in place before you start to think of, do I adopt this tool? Do I go for this change?
mm-hmm,
Start to have a transformation playbook. Think about where AI can really help and be part of your journey. And
mm-hmm,
then start to actually pull together like a skilling plan, the teams. What do
mm-hmm,
you need? And even a change management plan. My focus has been to sort of take a little bit of that fear away and just say, look, it is going to be orchestration between human intelligence and AI led transformation. And we
mm-hmm,
have to sort of take that journey together. But
mm-hmm,
if we can start from a point of, is it going to replace this? Am I going to lose these people?
mm-hmm,
Do I need to fundamentally change? Then I think we're jumping the gun. So, what I'm trying to do is kind of just go back and say, let's start to talk about the process, take away the fear, and
mm-hmm.
start to think about how do we orchestrate this in a way that works for everyone.
You said something that's really important, that you need to know what AI can do for you, and you have
Mhm.
to fit it into the context of the larger plan, the transformation plan that you have. Are you finding that people actually know what that is, or do you still have to educate them on that part of it as well?
I think people know, but I don't know if it is completely sort of, how do I put it? If it has been completely fleshed out, you have these ideas in which set in sort of separate siloed structures, even in many businesses. You have, oh, I need this transformation here in marketing, and within marketing, I need this transformation here
Mm-hmm,
in terms of how we look at our creative, how we look at our measurement.
mm-hmm.
But they're not coming together as a
Right.
strategy of adaptation.
Right. Yeah, because the AI component of it could actually cross over into all these different places versus just seeing it in the context of a silo that you're currently a part of. I think that's what you're really saying, right?
Yeah, yes. And I mean, I keep saying that I don't think we should think about these changes as incremental changes. We should think
Right.
about a new way of thinking about it. And once you start to think about it as an overall strategy, you start to put a playbook in place. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things that I hear right now are all about, oh, let's make this incremental change here. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the way to go about it. But that's just my
Right.
personal opinion.
No, no, I get that, but I think you're tapping into something that's super important, which is the fact that um, people go straight to the tactic as opposed to thinking about the
Mhm.
strategy and the
Yeah.
process of how you get to the tactic, right?
Yes.
Even without AI, people were doing that already, and a lot of marketeers tried to bring people along by saying, no, no, there's a process here. We have to follow the process before
Yeah.
we get to the tactics part of it. With AI, it seems like we're doing that same thing all over again in my mind, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. Yeah. And I think by jumping the gun and getting straight to the tactics, sometimes you
Mm.
make it feel like it's a zero-sum game.
Correct.
AI wins, humans lose. And I just don't think it's a zero-sum game.
Right, right. So let's work through that, right? So let's
Mhm.
say, for example, there's a company that is starting up right now, the process of saying, "Hey, we need to ramp up on our AI capabilities as an organization, right? And we need to do the we know it's important, we agree it's important, but we got to start somewhere." How would you walk a company like that through what you're describing? Walk us through that process.
Um, Good question. Um, I'm going to just go back to probably my experience with all of this, the various times when I've had to scale up, build teams, which
Mm.
was the pre-AI period. Let's talk about that. And I think the playbook is still the same. You have
Hmm.
to, and I kind of think about it always. I like my two by two kind of matrices. So if
Yeah.
I can just, I start to think about where we need the impact to come through. What are some of the areas where we definitely believe that this is going to give us an edge? This is where we need to come in and where we have a strong offer. And then when
Mm.
you start to think about, if I was to look at it as a low impact to the organization or my team, high impact to the business, easy to implement, hard to implement. So if you
Mm.
think about it as a two by two matrix, and I start to then plot things down and say, okay, it is hard to implement. It is not going to have a lot of impact, but maybe it's a really new and shiny thing that everybody's going after.
Hmm.
But let's put this as a back burner project.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't. I often think about don't disregard it, but prioritize. What's the
Yeah.
P0? What's the P1? And that I think is a strategy which is very much needed today,
Hmm.
especially because there are new and shiny objects coming your way every single day. And it's
Yes.
so easy to get distracted.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if it is if it is easy to implement, and even if it is not going to have such a huge impact, think of it as a quick win because we need quick wins. When
Hmm.
we're going
Hmm.
through changes, it's almost like a feel good. Yes, we've landed this quick win. And there were
Hmm.
times in the past when I know that it may not have seemed like such a big deal, or it wasn't a big revenue driver for the agency,
Hmm.
for the business. But it felt like a quick win for my team, for the team morale. I
Hmm.
say go for it.
Right.
Um, if it is if you know it's going to have an easy impact, if it is going to be easy to implement, you've got the tools, you can, you know, either build or buy or whatever it is,
Mm.
and it is going to have an impact, high impact, go right off, make it your strategic priority, put your
Mm.
best resources, your top resources behind that. So I always advise people, when you're thinking about this, start to put a structure, because once you have
Mhm.
that structure, it's easy to get people to start to come up with more ideas, to buy into it, and to
Mhm.
implement it.
Mhm.
Back to our points, if you leave it at tactics, it seems like just checking a box. You put a simple framework around it, you start to think about how to actually make it work, not just for the immediate, but for the long term.
I love the way you structured it, like, high impact, low impact, easy implementation, hard implementation. That's easy for anybody to kind of like wrap their heads around, right? When you talk about impact, are you connecting that the access or dimension to, like, major pain points within the organization, workflow or processes, or do you treat that as a very separate activation or activity, rather, I should say?
I mean, impact is how you define it. I mean, impact
Hmm.
could be, driving more efficiency. Impact
Hmm.
could be in terms of, lowering costs to stay more competitive and increasing your, but still making sure that you're probably, increasing your profit margin. Whatever it is, your
Yeah.
definition of impact. Um,
Right.
and I've always, I've been in different scenarios. Like when I moved to San Francisco, what we were trying to do is, how do you sort of meet the needs of a clientele on the West Coast, which is so different
Hmm.
from a more traditional, let's say, CPG and pharma and auto sectors where we had worked. This was try, experiment. If it doesn't work, you move on, kind of a mindset.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
very little patience to kind of do something which is 6 weeks and then have a report, and then if it doesn't work, do something else. So we had to define impact very differently, and that was, how do we become more agile? How do we look at some of our tools differently, repurpose them to meet the needs of a very different kind of client? And so I think that definition of impact is what you make of it and what is needed
Yeah.
for your business.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because and that's exactly why I was poking at that question, because people naturally gravitate to, oh, impact has to be revenue growth or whatever,
Yeah.
which are higher order metrics, but there are other interim metrics, if you want to call it that, that can be just as important in helping you get to the higher order metric at the end of the day. So as you're framing the discussions with your team,
Yeah.
I would imagine that you would want people to at least think at both levels, not just one level, in terms of defining it, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you do have to lay out the roadmap. It's never just one thing, but
Yeah.
in that roadmap, you have to almost sort of define that there is a journey. We have to go through certain points to actually arrive at where we want to be eventually.
Yeah.
There is no magic wand.
Correct. So you gave us a great framework as to, hey, here's a way for you to organize your thinking around it, right? So in your mind, as you're thinking about the AI component of it now, let's kind of like hone into that for a second. um, you know um, you mentioned something that, along the lines of build or buy, right? When do you bring that question into the conversations? Does it come right at the point when you're doing the impact implementation part, or are you saying, no, that's an execution component, hold off on that until we first get the strategic components figured out first?
Interesting question, and I can't say that I have dealt with it a lot, but it has. When this has come up, it is about how much time and resource is it going to take us to actually build,
Hmm.
and are we best served by building something like this in-house, or some are there things which exist which can be then customized easily?
Hmm.
Because if you think about it from a cost perspective, a building there's a resource cost, there is the financial cost, there is the
Hmm.
time cost, because the time it takes to build something, if there is a good alternative which you can acquire and the cost benefit analysis kind of works out, I would go for to acquire something. you know
Right.
I think there's enough happening in terms of building that you have to kind of get out of this and say, oh, no, it has to be us. There are
Yeah.
customization possibilities which exist. And
Hmm.
if you just get away from that, say, okay, yes, I can customize it for my business, but the
Hmm.
fundamental sort of, what do you say? I'm looking for that word. The infrastructure exists, and then
Yeah.
build on
Yeah.
top of that.
Right. Right. So yeah, because the reason I'm kind of like asking all these kinds of questions is that in my experience, what I found is that sometimes the ambition is much higher than the actual reality of being able to execute, right? And people overpromise things, and that creates a problem as well when it comes to getting internal alignment, right? So apart from just driving the actual prioritization that you talked about, there's also how much can you actually get done based on where the organization actually is today, right? So what have you been your experiences, either from your past or even recently, with the AI stuff that you've been doing?
Um, Now, help me clarify the question for me. Maybe I missed
So,
it.
and what I'm trying to get to basically is that, for you to, there's one exercise to say, okay, what's hard, what's easy to do, right? What's the big impact, low impact? But then there's
Yeah,
also, where is your team, and what can they do and what they can't do, right? So is that
yeah.
a separate exercise and activity you go through as well?
Absolutely. I have done that in the past, is just to almost do a skills audit
Mm.
internally. And
Hmm.
I always find that skills audit is so useful. I did that at Google. I mean, I did this in my previous roles in Kantar,
Mm.
because in a way it also helps you uncover underutilized skills. There are people who are sitting there, but they have been put into roles where some of their skills haven't been utilized. But really understanding what skills exist, what do
Right.
we need to sort of outsource, where can we hire, gives you a talent plan. And I think
Hmm.
that plan is so important now because
Hmm.
there's kind of there's this feeling that, oh, we need to hire different people. Do we need to completely reskill? And going back to one of those earlier points, I feel like no, not all of us need to become coders,
Hmm.
but AI literacy is going to be really important. How do
Yes.
we start to create that AI literacy across our teams and across the organization? What do we
Hmm.
need to do? Who needs to
Hmm.
learn with skills?
Hmm.
So I think those kind of things are really important. And overall, I mean, personally, I feel for talent management professionals, it's going to be such an interesting challenge going forward because they'll almost need to become even more agile to sort of access the talent pools
Hmm.
which can you know ad- basically adapt to the rapidly sort of evolving technological needs.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating, but
Yeah.
my one sort of note of caution each time is don't disregard the skills that you already have.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah, because and that goes into the I think and you haven't said this, but I'm going to say it is that the skills that you have, they also have, if people have a growth mindset, they can also adapt and learn, but you have to give them the opportunity to do that, and not just assume that they can or cannot do it, basically, right?
I totally agree, Yogesh. I mean, when I moved to San Francisco, honestly, when I was looking at media measurement, I wouldn't call myself, I had to take baby steps. Sometimes I
Mm.
would tell my team to teach me, say, okay, media measurement for dummies. I know how to build a narrative. I know how to take it to market. Know how to find the opportunities.
Mhm.
And I've always believed in, I don't know it yet. That's the growth mindset bit, that's been my
Mhm.
mantra for ages.
Yeah.
I will acquire that skill. As long as you have people who are open to learning and
Yeah.
acquiring new skills, you
Yeah.
have them. I mean, you have the team which can really grow with you.
Right. So I want to kind of ask a question around that specifically, and we'll continue going down the list of things that have to happen, right? But if your team members are saying no, like I'm, and I'm just making this as an example. I'm not saying that everyone's like this, but let's say if there's an individual who says, "Hey, I'm just a few years away from retirement. I don't want to spend my time dealing with all this stuff." A very specific example, but what would you say in those situations? How should leaders handle that situation?
Funnily enough, I've had that experience. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
I literally made it
Um,
up on the fly, but okay, go ahead.
I mean,
So,
look, I don't think there is a resistance to change. Maybe,
mhm,
and no, there could be resistance to change. Let me correct myself. But at the same
yeah,
time, I think you have to understand, let's say this person's been around for 15 years. They
yeah,
understand, um, they've seen a lot. They obviously have been valuable enough for the organization to have been around for so long. Is there a way you can use their skills differently rather than pushing them to say it's either this way or the highway? I mean, I often look for, can their skills be useful somewhere else rather than
yeah,
sort of just saying, no, you're no longer useful for the team. And more
right,
often than not, you will realize that expertise and that experience does count.
yeah,
And it can be used maybe in a different way. So you
right,
repurpose the role, you look for other opportunities, but sometimes you
yeah,
don't have that luxury, you know?
yeah,
And then it's about making sure that you steer them towards other opportunities which might be right for them.
correct, correct. And I think this is something that a lot of leaders, especially younger, or inexperienced leaders, don't think through. And their natural instinct is, oh, if that's person no longer of value to me, cut the person out of the team. And I just don't think that's the right way to do it, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. I mean, but at the same time, as I said, sometimes your business realities is such that
Yeah,
you may not have a choice. And
yeah,
if you if that choice doesn't exist, how do you sort of ensure that a person who's contributed so much to an organization over so many years,
Yeah.
how do you make it easier for them to sort of find something else? And I've
Right.
often, tried to do that, either recommend, connect them to others, hopefully
Mhm.
provide them a way to continue contributing, but maybe in a different environment, different context.
Perfect. Makes sense. So you talked about, the audit. You talked about the prioritization up front in terms of where we want to go. That helps with the vision building and the road mapping. You talked about people, and
Mhm.
how do you do? You assess your talent and figure out, who can do
Yep.
what, etc. Right? And even as you're thinking about the resistance to change, that was a specific point. But like, what is the level or degree of change that needs to happen, and are people on board or not on board? Or are they optimistic? We just talked about that.
Yep.
Then there's another area which I also want to touch upon, which is process, right? So how is
Mhm.
work currently being done? And with the implementation of AI capabilities, especially in the context of low
Mhm.
impact, high impact, etc., does that affect process? What are your thoughts on that space of trying to figure things out?
Um, I mean, it's something that I'm experimenting with, but again, I'll
Mm.
go back into thinking through the different steps, and I'll go back again. I'll talk about sort of insights in the industry that I'm so familiar with.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of process, I'm starting to think of it more as defining how we would have done things traditionally.
Hmm.
Okay, how have you done things? And when I say traditional, I mean, again, that's a very that's a very fluid word, because what is
Yeah.
traditional keeps changing, right,
Yeah.
over a period of time. But how do we do things now?
Yeah.
Where is the opportunity for AI augmentation, and where is the opportunity for the human value at? So and I the reason I'm thinking about this together is because you don't want to just say, okay, let's implement AI and then let's start to think about what the role of the human is. So, I'll give you an example, and it's just very basic. I mean,
Hmm.
let's say you were doing, and you and I have talked about this in a separate conversation. Let's say if you were doing some kind of trend identification, which was through surveys and focus groups and maybe something social around it. But it took time to get all of those inputs together. And that's usually the way you would do it. You would have these communities of different demographic groups, you would have surveys and focus groups. Now, suddenly, from an AI augmentation, you have the ability to start to look at trends analysis through a lot of user generated content, text analytics, video analytics. See, and you can also do a lot of even predictive work based on that trend. Okay, looking at what we've
Yeah.
seen, where it would go. So suddenly, you can see there is an opportunity for AI augmentation.
Hmm.
There may still be a rule for the traditional ways in which you do it. Maybe you do the AI augmented work and then you follow up with some focus groups, etc.
Hmm.
But then immediately you also start to layer on what's the human value add, and you define it. And the human value add is to really understand the cultural interpretation as well as
Hmm.
the context behind the trends that you are seeing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and And when you put it in this way, one, as I said, you create a roadmap for implementation where everything has a role, and you define that sort of the synergy between AI and humans upfront.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's kind of how I'm thinking about the process today. And and I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I think you're pointing out a very important thing, right? Which is, don't make one or the other the afterthought. You have to think about them in context of each other, right? And you almost have to force yourself and the team to force themselves to think through those things and saying, hey, if AI can do take us from A to B, I still have to go from C to Z, or it's A to G, and then and so on and so forth, kind of thing, right? But we have to put that thought into thinking that through. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to effectively drive that change, basically.
it absolutely, and I think it's also helps with the communication, because you're working
Mm.
with a team, you're working with several teams sometimes in a matrix environment, and if you can lay out the process, and if you can lay out this is how we're going to do it, it makes it easier to communicate, especially when so many people are are grappling with the change that is happening at the same time.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah, and I think, as a leader, you have to kind of like, um, almost like, filter out the noise and
Yes.
get people to focus, right? So, and you're kind of like laying out the pathway for it's like it's the leadership checklist that you just really walked us through right now. Roadmap, talent, people, process, and the last one I guess is going to be what, infrastructure maybe, that needs to be in place, right?
Yeah, one of the things which I do want to touch upon, and I found,
Yeah,
that doesn't get called out as often as it does, is
yeah,
communication. As part of
communication,
any
right?
change management, is part of
Yeah.
any scalable, scaling, building. I think communication is so important,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
because if people know why you're doing it, if people know how you're doing it, if people know the impact it is going to have on them, I
Hmm.
feel like you can take care of a lot of those curveballs that come your way. And it reassures your team. It reassures the people who are going to be impacted.
Hmm.
All those concentric circles as you're trying to
Yeah.
build, as you're trying to change something, adapt to a new environment. I
Hmm.
find communication is so, so critical.
Right. And do you find that, in your experience, what happens if you do it well versus what when you don't do it well? Does that become a factor in driving trust or mistrust, or what do you typically see?
I mean, when it's not done well, I think it creates lack of trust, lack of certainty.
Mm.
It leads to varying interpretations of the same situation. People in different
Mm.
contexts will interpret the same situation, the same piece of communication differently.
Okay.
So I say over communicate, and also understand that different people within your
Hmm.
team, different stakeholders at different levels, have different communication styles.
Yeah.
And you have to sort of, in some way, anticipate and then
Yeah.
modify how you really communicate depending on who you're talking to. Um,
Right.
a one size fits all approach also doesn't work.
Mm, yeah, of course. Yeah, and it completely makes sense, right? So uh, are there any other foundational elements that we have to think about? Because before we talk about actually the scaling aspects of it, because all this stuff is setting you up to be able to scale, I would imagine, right?
Mhm. Yeah. No, I think we've covered a lot of those things.
Okay. So now let's talk about the scaling aspect of it, right? Because let's say, for example, you choose that among the 10 different AI tools, you put it into the quadrants, and you came up with, say, four that you want to adopt and scale them
Mhm.
across the organization. Talk to us about what your experience has been in terms of either with AI or with any from your past, as to what are those, like, 3 to 5 things that you would want to do to help with the implementation of scaling, basically.
Ah, great question. Yeah, you're really forcing me to think here, Yogesh.
Well, that's what I'm supposed to be doing, right?
I know, I know. Well, once you've identified, and I would say once you've
Yeah,
identified the opportunity, once you've identified, let's say, the tools, and
yeah.
again, just because there hasn't been enough of this opportunity to think about it in the context of AI tools, I'm going to go back to my prior experience when we said, okay, these are the methodologies. Let's say we're doing
Yeah.
some advanced attribution or connected TV measurement, or
Hmm.
or different kinds of sort of brand lift studies, or we're going after a different client portfolio. I remember there was this one time where we said, okay, we have a lot of this long tail of clients, and which
Hmm.
was really taking up a lot of resource.
Hmm.
We were losing people, and how do we sort of address that?
Hmm.
So and that was also a change, or not a tool, but a thing that we had to implement. But once
Hmm.
you've identified, I start to, and I'm just talking about my experience and as a leader, and how I discuss with what I discuss with my team.
Hmm.
You start to sort of discuss with the core team first, the people who are going to be responsible for implementing these aspects. You start to think about what are the resources that they need. Do they have
Hmm.
enough time? Do we need to discuss prioritization? If if you decide to focus more on something, you have to take something off the plate. And I think that is something which is not discussed as often. And
Right.
I often say, let's sit down, let's think about, if you're already spending 50 hours a week, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This doesn't mean that you're going to now spend 60 hours.
Yeah.
Let's say
Yeah.
you're still going to spend that much. What needs to come
Mm-hmm.
off? So again, I always start with prioritization. I
Mm-hmm.
always start to think about, okay, as part of this prioritization, if you're going to give something up, what is going to be the impact on the
Mm-hmm.
organization, on the revenue, on on clients, whatever it is? You have to
Yeah.
assess the impact, and then you have to figure out ways in which you minimize that impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, the tools or the areas of the business that you've decided to prioritize, you then have to start thinking about what are the resources, and not just the people resources, the infrastructure resources,
Mm-hmm.
the marketing resources. If it's a new tool, what kind of communication does it need? I mean, in Cantor days, I was thinking about, okay, what kind of client outreach does it need? Who is going to do that outreach? What kind of a
Mm-hmm.
budget do I need to set aside for marketing activities?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to plan every aspect of it. Just because you have the intent, it doesn't magically happen.
Right.
So for me, I've always thought about the the new product, the new offer, the new tool, the infrastructure, the people resources, the marketing resources. Who else do I need to lean out to get the support that I need? I mean, yes, I was leading the business in San Francisco, but you have clients who have been working with, and their teams in the East Coast as well. Do I need to have partners on the East Coast who are able to take the same thing and deliver the same experience to the clients on the East Coast?
Right.
Uh, so again, I think again, I'll probably go back again to saying a roadmap, but for me, scalability needs intent,
Mm-hmm.
a strong implementation focus, and
Mm-hmm.
checks and balances. You have to check, are we hitting, our milestones? And if you're
Right.
not, what have you missed?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or where have you put in where have you put inadequate resources or effort or whatever it is, and when can we correct ourselves?
Yeah.
So I mean, I am a strong believer in measuring what we do, measure what matters,
Yeah. Yeah.
and course correct if you're not on the right track.
Right.
Does that give you a sense? I mean, I think it's
Yeah,
really.
it does. You actually made me think of a situation I had faced back in 2004, 2005. So it's not AI related, but I think it still applies, to any situation, quite frankly speaking. We had a director in the beauty division who was responsible for, um, scaling up trend analysis and new ideation processes for P&G, right? And
Mhm.
she had, she came up with a process, and was working very effectively on a cross beauty perspective. I was working on bar soaps and body washes at the time,
Yeah.
and as a leadership team, we had decided like we also had to ramp up on our ideation process related to trends, so we could have a systematic engine that needed to happen. My first reaction was, oh my gosh, this is incremental work. Um,
Mhm.
my team of 7 or 8 people, they can't handle it, and like I was requesting an incremental resource, a person to help me with the work.
Yeah.
And you know the answer came back saying, nope, sorry, you're not getting an extra resource, but you still have to get the work done, right? And this is, I think, a very
Yeah.
common situation that
Yes.
people face, right, at the end of the day. And the switch I did, which is what you just talked about, which is something has to come off, right? So I tried to go through the projects, nothing could come off. But what could happen is I could break that entire capability piece into smaller chunks, and it
Mhm.
suddenly became 10% of someone's time across my entire team of eight
Yes.
people. So each person had something to do that was 10% of their time, but in aggregate, it gave me what I needed to get done basically. And we were actually able to
Yeah.
implement that whole process in a more, structured way as a consequence, you know.
Yeah.
So is that something that you've also experienced or seen like that?
Yes, I mean, I think that's a great example, and also in a way, it communicates we are in this together. We're
Correct.
each doing
Yes.
our part. We are in this together, and I think in a resource scarce world, and I can
Yeah.
even say that even at Google, I had these kind of, everybody would feel like you have so many resources. No, you don't. You still had to make things happen, and without sort of having all the kind of the perfect resource world that you wanted. And then you have to really
Yeah.
think about, okay, how do we share? How do we make it happen? Where can we say no? The
Yeah.
power of no is also
Yeah.
really, really important. You don't say no to everything, but there are times when you have to really set up and say, no, we can't do this. And
Exactly.
don't be scared. Don't be afraid to
Yeah.
use that power.
I won't say or, I'm going to say and to what you said is that if you are forced to, or if you're unable to say no, you can certainly negotiate, the timelines, right?
Absolutely.
Because, this is where some of those things that people forget is like, oh, I have to, you're telling me to get it done by X date, but I have three other things to get done on the same date. Negotiate it, and that's how you kind of like manage it. So this sounds so tactical, but it's so important at the end of the day, you know.
It
So.
is. I mean, it is so, and we're going to be in such a period of change.
Mhm.
We all have to embrace that change. I feel like I don't
Yeah.
think there's any way getting around it, especially um, when I think about the insights industry and we talk about sort of the inflection point in the existential crisis. I mean, there's so many ways in which I've had this conversation about, oh, what's
Yeah.
going to happen to insights, where every part of the journey is getting automated and
Mm.
the costs are being driven down. I mean, and clients are asking for things like yesterday, and we just don't have
Mm.
the time to do that kind of deep analysis. I've
Yeah.
heard, I've had so many of these conversations. And as this change is coming, I think it's going to be so important to really not just jump in and react right away. Or
Mm.
if you're going to react, have a think about, you know, what what's going to work without sort of everything crashing and burning, or people feeling like they have no autonomy, they have no authority anymore, and they just have to
Correct.
respond.
Correct. So in a way, we've kind of, I didn't even ask the question, but we kind of like went into it anyway. So this is one of the challenges that's there in implementation and scalability, right? Which is lack of resources or lack of prioritization. Are there any other things or lack of skills? We talked about that as well. In some cases, you have to build the skill set up. Are there anything else besides those two or three things that come to mind for you in terms of challenges that people face when it comes to implementation?
Um, I think there's one more. I mean, I don't know if you can call it a challenge, but I feel like we have to get used to a little bit more for fluid structures. We've always had this concept of
Hmm.
teams.
Yeah.
And I've seen like this is our team, this is what people do. And I feel like we need to embrace fluidity even more, because the way we work is going to change. We need to kind of get more comfortable knowing that
Hmm.
sometimes you're just going to come
Hmm.
in, do your bit, move on to something else,
Yeah.
because we're just adapting and
Hmm.
implementing new ways of working. And I
Hmm.
feel like teams need to get more comfortable with more fluid structures.
That makes sense now. So, what you just said. Do you see differences between the startup world versus the more established companies on this point? Is that comment more directed towards the established companies versus
I
startups,
would,
or?
yes, I did think that it is probably more established companies. I feel like agility is the name of the game when it comes to startups. And, I'm
Yeah.
working with one at the moment, and everybody just rolls up their sleeves. You just do what is
Hmm.
needed. We meet in a coffee shop, we just, and then we
Yeah.
decide, and then we sit in our separate corners, we come back again. I've worked in libraries and coffee shops, turn
Hmm.
things around, like, worked with absolutely no um, frameworks or structures, but we still made it happen just because we had to. Um,
Right.
Agility is the name of the game there, um, but you have a lot of people who are now entering the startup workforce, even though they have been part of established organizations. I am
Hmm.
one person,
Yeah.
and that's kind of, I feel like, it's a skill that people need to learn, be comfortable with.
Hmm.
Um, because you may not have the luxury of having all of those things laid out for you like you've had in the past.
What do you? That makes a lot of sense. So what would you say are some of the more common mistakes that people make when they're trying to scale, especially if you're a startup, right? So, can you speak to that a little bit?
Um, I think it's trying to do too many things at the same time. And
Hmm.
having focus is really important.
Yeah.
And in some of my discussions with a couple of startups that I'm talking to at the moment, is like,
Hmm.
um, it's so easy sometimes to get distracted because you're
Hmm.
getting a lot of advice each time you're going for an investor, you're meeting an investor, you're doing a pitch, you are
Hmm.
getting feedback. You can get distracted. So I do think that the focus is really important. um, Focus, build something, know how to scale it, then also look at other options, other things that you can do. I
Hmm.
um, I also believe in sort of thinking about the relevance, the value proposition.
Yeah.
I'm sure you may have come across this in some of your conversations. I find it's a lot about, we've got this product, we've got this great
Hmm.
product, let's figure out how to get it to market. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what need are you meeting? What's the relevance? Why should
Hmm.
somebody use it? Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's an important question that one needs to answer.
Absolutely. Now, Amit actually dropped a question, so I'm going to put it up on the screen here. How would you deal with anxious team members that are afraid that their jobs are at risk? I think as we gain efficiencies, we might have to get rid of some of the positions. It gets difficult when some of the same people are SMEs that you need for inputs to develop the AI solution. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, I'm not going to deny. I mean, the layoffs that we see happening in the tech sector do speak of the fact that it is not going to be business as usual.
Hmm.
Efficiencies are going to come through a lot of these things. Jobs are going to get
Hmm.
automated. So I'm not going to say that's not going to happen. But
Hmm.
again, I think some of that fear needs to be addressed upfront. Again, by defining the role, by being transparent about where we're trying to build efficiencies, what
Hmm.
impact that would have, and
Yeah.
how can people probably creating, almost again, as I say, a talent plan, a skilling plan. It may
Yeah.
not always, but I've seen a lot of uncertainty across the board, even with people who probably don't need to have that uncertainty.
Hmm.
I saw that at Google, my team, when
Hmm.
when the layoffs started happening. Everybody, even people who I did not think would need to be worried about that, were feeling insecure. So how
Yeah.
do you allay some of the concerns? Um,
Hmm.
Again, open lines of communication, talking about the changes, um, and being honest. I feel we are all adults in the room. And if people know what's coming, it's easier for them to plan. And this is not to say, no, you're going to get laid off for sure in 6 months' time. It is
Hmm.
about talking about where the business is, what kind of transitions are happening, and and the impact that it could possibly have.
Yeah. I would add to what you just said, in terms of, the not just the planning part from as an individual, but this thing about AI, and especially in the market research space,
Yeah.
I'm honing in on that, particular space. I've heard people say things like, "Oh, AI is going to take care of all the executional, all,
Mhm.
repetitive stuff that I'm doing. Survey design, maybe codification of my open-ended texts and things like that, which I was doing in the past, and now AI can do for me. But I'm not going to, my human part of it, I'll do the strategy work." That's what
Yeah.
people sometimes say, right? And we actually have to push ourselves a bit further than that, because strategy is not defined by the insights person per se. It's defined by the
Yeah.
leaders of the organization. So, are you actually saying that you're going to replace the leader, or are you saying that you're going to do it on behalf of the leader?
Yeah.
So that's actually a false choice in a way, if you see what I mean,
Ye-
right?
No, I agree. I mean, again, I think it's going back to, something we discussed earlier. You can't really have silos and say, this is going to be AI, this is going to be us. I feel like you almost have to have that it needs to work. It's going to be a bit of a dance. It's going to be that orchestration that needs to happen. I mean, again,
Yeah.
simply if you think about insights, marketing research, I think from
Yeah.
survey creation to data collection to analysis to report,
Yeah.
everything is changing. Everything is getting impacted, right?
Yeah.
Does that mean there is no role? No, I do think that the organizations which are going to be best placed are not the ones with the most advanced AI tools. I mean, I saw that with vendors who are pitching different kind of tools. I don't think it's the ones which have the most tools or the most experienced teams.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think it is teams which or businesses which manage this dynamic partnership
Yeah.
of where AI comes in, where the human intelligence comes in, and how do you apply human wisdom to technological innovation?
Yeah. And to that end, right? I think you have to think again, going back to that growth mindset point we were talking about earlier, which is that maybe we have to define new tools, maybe we have to define new workflows than the current ones. That transition is part of your role now, right?
Yes,
In a way, I personally believe that a lot of companies, especially on the vendor side, are offering like bolt-ons to existing processes. We can
yes,
make your survey design better, we can do this better. That's showing efficiency and its incrementality. But I think there's a
yeah,
bigger thing going on here, which is going to redefine the way we do work overall. So which
absolutely.
companies are going to step up, and show us the pathway for that one, basically, right?
Yeah. I don't think the world is all about SaaS platforms. I think there are some really good ones out there. I don't think the world is all about
Yeah.
SaaS platforms. I mean,
Yeah.
I totally believe that AI today gives us the speed and scale to
Hmm.
find patterns that we may not see on our own because you're interrogating multiple data sets at the same time.
Yeah.
You're able to do that. But think about, I mean, I think it's the human intuition
Hmm.
which helps you find meaning in these patterns, the cultural relevance, the emotional depth.
Hmm.
I think that you can't discount that. I'll give you this. I was doing this sort of this course, and there was this little snippet which talked about a gesture, a construction worker putting out
Hmm.
their left hand to ask you to stop, a hitchhiker putting out their left hand because they want the hitchhiker to hike,
Yeah.
and a cyclist, again, because it's a turn signal. Now, from an
Yes.
AI perspective, these are all left hands sticking out,
Yeah.
right? Because, but from a human perspective, as soon as you see it, oh, this three left hands sticking out means three different things.
Correct.
It's a
Correct.
stop, ask for a hitchhiker, and a person turning left. And I'm like, it's so simple, right?
That's a
But
great
it's
example,
it's a
actually. Yeah.
context.
Yeah. It's a context thing, right? Well, there is stuff happening on the AI space around the context thing as well. So something new came out in the last week or two. CMP, CDP, something like that. I'm not sure what exactly the acronym is right now, but and I'm not enough research yet to be able to talk about it intelligibly. But yeah, the context is the thing that will determine the quality of the outputs that you get from AI. But until that output gets improved, humans have to play that role, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to balance automation with empathy and creativity.
Yeah.
You can seed everything to AI, but make it a
Hmm.
partner, make it a collaborator. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I am all for it.
Totally get that. So, as obviously, nobody's going to be able to predict what's going to happen next. In the 5 years, 10 years out, hard to tell.
Yeah.
We can't even tell what's going to happen in the next 1 month, right?
Yes.
So given that degree of uncertainty, right, as you're looking at, the kind of advisory work that you're providing, startup companies or other companies right now, you know what would be those one or two things that you would be saying to people to say that this is what you need to be paying attention to, even if you're doing all this work on, like, scalability, AI, and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff? What would be the one or two things that you should keep constantly be doing so that you are somewhat getting ahead of the game, so to speak?
Uh, Great question again. You're right. I mean, I don't think we can anticipate completely. I mean, things are changing at such a rapid pace.
Yeah.
I I ask the people that I'm working with and the teams that I'm working with, I said, actively participate in the change.
Mm,
Um, Active participation, understanding, and be part of this change, understanding
mhm,
what's happening out there, especially the changes that are impacting your line of work. I mean, if it is
mhm,
healthcare, what are some of the changes that are happening in healthcare technology? If it is
mhm,
insights, what's happening there? So participating, being part of this change, understanding the impact that it has, and being agile enough to respond to it.
mhm, mhm.
Having a plan. I mean, having almost like a change management plan, because you know change is coming and change is happening.
Yeah.
I've often talked also about the fact that, with AI, what's happening is this: it's almost like you have some barriers which are getting lowered, and certain barriers which are getting increased, which are
Mhm,
increasing, right?
mhm.
And it's happening in tandem, and it's happening in different ways across different sectors. So how do you kind of really keep track of what barriers are increasing and what barriers are lowering, just so that you can really, again, anticipate and respond to what's happening around you?
I love
And
that point. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Keep going. Sorry. Yeah.
no. And I think the last bit is, have a talent strategy. Have a talent strategy. It's not just about, okay, I'm going to just acquire this talent.
Mhm,
How do you sort of start to think about upskilling your talent? How do you kind of plan
mhm,
and put almost an AI education component?
mhm,
Um, you know, I do believe prompt engineering or prompting skills are going to be part of the curriculum going forward.
mhm.
How do you start to create, a roadmap for your team to sort of be part of this journey? Um,
Absolutely. You're right. And if I can just interject, like, I've mentioned in previous, podcasts, this semester I was teaching an AI and marketing class for the first time here at the university, right? And within the second class, we were already talking about prompts and prompt
yeah,
engineering in a way, right? And students were practicing it and so on and so forth. But the reality is that is almost like, learning the ABCs right now.
yeah,
Learning how to think about, how do you create the right kind of context for the AI? How do you create a custom agent, GPT agent? How do you connect different agents together in a workflow process, for example, or even creating AI-driven
hmm,
chatbots? There's so many spaces you can go into depending on what your, interest levels are. That's the spaces where you can start reskilling on, you know.
yeah,
And I can tell you, with the class of 14 or 16 students, in 7 weeks, they went from I don't know nothing about AI to having predictive tools being built using ChatGPT, and then they're presenting to companies like Coca-Cola Consolidated, showing them how they could be actually building out
yeah.
new ways to do optimization. Which was, in my, at least for me, I thought that was pretty impressive. But that's how fast things can happen. It's just about you wanting to lead into that, basically, right?
Totally. Just lean into the change, embrace it. And, I just feel there is so much for all of us to learn and experiment with at the moment. I think it's a fascinating time.
Absolutely. So, last question, Preeti, and we're almost at the top of the hour. I don't know if you realize how fast things have gone here.
This went
Uh,
really quickly.
so, I asked you a lot of questions. I know it may have even felt that I asked some difficult questions. But my last question to you is that, is there something that I have not asked you, but that's really top of mind for you, and you would want to share with everyone?
Um, no, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, to me, I think, honestly, whenever I talk, I mean, I feel like, especially for people who are maybe later in their career, mid-career people or late stage,
Mm,
and especially to them, I speak to them and I say that don't be scared. I found there's a lot of uncertainty, and I know a lot of my friends and colleagues and ex-colleagues have also been impacted with layoffs. And
mm,
I think there's just that, okay, what's next? And
mm,
all I want to say is just, there is so much we've learned, and there are so many, especially mid-career professionals. You've
mm,
learned, you've been in so many different environments, embrace this change, and there's experience and the experience of navigating through all of the ups and downs teaches you a lot. And how do you kind of bring your all of that experience and expertise into this new world?
Amazing. That's a great way to end. I think everybody has something to offer. It's just a matter of, taking that leap of faith and doing it, right? So, Preeti,
Yes.
I can't thank you enough for, you graciously giving so much of your time in preparing for this podcast and being on the podcast. So, thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you so much for
So,
having me. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much,
thank
Yogesh.
You're welcome. So, and for everybody listening on the call, the next time we're going to be on is on May 9th, when I'm going to have Jason Hauer from on as my guest. He has his own holding company. He was one of the co-founders for the Garage Group. So he's done a lot of work in the innovation space. He's currently now investing into companies in the AI space, especially in the market research space. So he's constantly scanning the horizons and seeing what's next, basically. So that's the conversation that's coming up on May 9th. So thanks everybody for listening. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and see you on May 9th.